Hello, I'm Adrian. Thank you for joining us for 0 to 100, Building Highly Productive Teams. This event focuses on how to stay productive and up your team's productivity in this era of dispersed teams working in the digital workplace. Educating us on this topic are two experts. We have Anne Raimondi, the Chief Customer Officer of Guru, a management software company that reinvents knowledge sharing, and Rajiv Ayyangar, CEO of Tandem, a virtual office for remote teams. Welcome, Anne and Rajiv.
All right, Rajiv, it's so great to chat with you today. I think our topic is building highly productive teams, and there's just a lot to that right now, given that so many teams and companies are working remote, and that's a new muscle that they're building. So I think I'm just going to dive right in and share that with a lot of the companies and teams I'm working with right now. Everyone's a little anxious about sort of remote fatigue heading into the fall, now that people are more than 6 months into working remote, starting to feel a little frayed at the edges and worried about like, how do you keep team morale up, or even if it's down, how do you raise it? And so would love to hear your perspectives, both in terms of the team at Tandem, but also what you're seeing your customers. What are you seeing people do to really address this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Anne. And for context, Tandem's a virtual office for remote teams. We help you see who's online, get a sense of what people are doing, who they're talking with, and then collaborate in one click. And so I'm kind of speaking from two perspectives. One is we have a small but fast-growing team, and of course we're building this product that we're living in every day. So we're starting to develop stronger and stronger opinions on what's working and what's not working. But also we're used by thousands of teams around the world, and we have this really privileged perspective on what people's struggles are, and then how they're also solving some of these challenges of going remote all of a sudden. I think in terms of some of the themes that are emerging, I think a big one is thinking beyond just functional communication into more of the social spaces. Like, how do we create those social spaces to talk? And there's been, I think, one of the things we've seen that's really exciting is an explosion in creativity around that. People willing to try new things, whether it's kind of the more conventional type of team building activities that are being translated online, like virtual escape rooms, or whether it's really thinking about shifts in the everyday communication, whether it's different practices or creating spontaneous spaces like happy hours or games that you play together. So we're seeing a wide variety of experiments being run.
Oh, that's amazing, because I think that is what, the teams that really were kind of in-person teams, what I'm hearing and seeing is that's what they miss the most, that those serendipitous interactions or the fun social moments, whether they're planned or unplanned. So I would love to hear a little bit more. You were saying like, okay, escape rooms, or, the replacement of like team lunches. How are you finding people do that, and do that in a way that feels natural, that isn't like, oh, you're invited to a Zoom meeting? Would love to hear how people are using Tandem to make that feel like a very natural social interaction.
Yeah, I think the first thing is it differs by team. So one of the things that we see in the teams that are like the most collaborative, the most fast moving, the most tightly knit, is they really take ownership of this thread of how do we create spaces for our team to connect, and they experiment and they adapt it to their own team culture. I think by contrast, like, we've built up a lot of shared culture around offices, but there's still a lot to be discovered about the virtual office. Mm-hmm. So some of the things we've seen, there are teams that have, so in Tandem, there's this notion of rooms, which are kind of like persistent calls where you can have conversations around a certain topic. And when you join a room, people who are subscribed to that room get a little notification. And so we saw a team that had a plank room where they would take a break from work by entering that room, and then everybody would take 30 seconds and do a plank. We have a lot of teams that have morning coffee rooms, or like hang out and chat before stand up or after stand up rooms. Certainly a lot of happy hours. We're seeing a lot of teams embracing shared music listening, like listening to Spotify together.
Oh, love that.
As a way to connect. And let's see, yeah, lots of different approaches to shared experiences. When you're in an office, you have this, the lunchtime is kind of the default shared experience, and then you can add on there because of schedules, because people are at home with their families, and because eating online can be kind of awkward sometimes. That doesn't always translate to remote, so people are looking for other alternatives.
Yeah, I just want to highlight what you said there that is kind of really important and inspirational to people who are kind of looking for what can they do, is that idea of like testing, right? Just like having an innovation and like product mindset towards culture, towards remote culture, of like what's important to us, what are our team values, and then how might we experiment and kind of have some fun and see the positive side of this opportunity. And also props to the team doing the plank room. That's like twofold: social and health. I love that. Now, so we've been talking about social and, fostering these more natural relationships and conversations and opportunities to get to know each other remotely. But I also want to talk about, the kind of the real challenges people are also having now, juggling if they're parents with young kids, or kids doing school online, or people taking care of, family members, or even just team members that are feeling isolated and just kind of almost burning themselves out because all they're doing is working because they're, sheltering at home. How do you see balancing kind of productivity and work, but then also taking time for, self-care and recharging, and how to help employees with that during this time?
Yeah, it's a super important topic. I think there are a lot of ideas that in my head that connect to this. I think these types of, lots of people are facing different challenges in their personal lives. Lots of things are difficult in the world right now, and you can't really separate that from work. I think, and this is the challenge with trying to create social spaces that are very independent from work. Like, yes, virtual escape rooms are great. It's an amazing activity. It's a fun retreat. It's novel, right? But it's not the solution to the type of connection that people have in the office. And I think one of the reasons is you don't have this binary like social versus work mode. We're all bringing our lives to work, even when it's in the office. After the meeting, you share something that's challenging for you with a friend at work. And these types of relationships are hard. They're hard to replicate when you translate things into kind of segments of meetings. And so I think one approach is to really try and create more spontaneous spaces. This is one of the reasons a lot of people, Tandem isn't just about talking more efficiently. One of the biggest things that people have told us is they're looking for connection with their team. And that theme comes up again and again and again. And by creating more visibility, so you can see who else is talking and jump in, by creating just more flexibility. So after a meeting, you can have those 2-minute hallway conversations that you would normally have in person. We can start to recover some of that space for the real human conversations that can get lost in a schedule with back-to-back meetings.
Yeah, no, you bring up some really important points about like what actually fosters connection, right? Like having having context, having it not be planned, like the serendipitous discovery of what your colleagues are interested in and passionate about, and those like the conversations before and after the meetings that get lost, to your point, when it's just scheduled back to back. So I love
Yeah.
that, and being intentional, like how do we, knowing that that's what matters, how do we as leaders like intentionally design that and enable that for our teams?
And on the topic of like people's family lives, I think that's been one of the kind of the logistics of that, especially people with kids, has been one of the challenges, and also the rewards of working remotely. So this is really personal for us on the founding team. So I don't have kids, but we started building Tandem because, well, pre-COVID, both of my co-founders had kids, and we went from working in person to working remotely, so they could have some of that balance. And that was actually the starting point where we realized, like, remote work doesn't have the same sort of collaboration, fluidity, and connection and creativity as in-person work. And that's how we started prototyping Tandem. And on the team right now, we have, I actually think, over half of our founding team members have kids. And so that flexibility to say, hey, let's chat in 5 minutes, and we can have like a 10-minute chat on this, and you can have these smaller kind of bursts of communication, and then interspersed with periods of focus time, and there's more flexibility to fit work around your life.
Yeah. I love many things about that. Like, one, that over half the team has kids, and so that everyone's sort of building more of that empathy, I think, for parents on the team. There's you have to bring your full self to work when when people have to pause and make sure their kids are doing their online learning, or if they've got toddlers or babies on their laps. Like, it hopefully makes us all more human and more empathetic to what everyone has going on. But I also loved a key element of communication that you brought up, which is like, not all communication has to be very structured in a meeting, because that's one of the things that I think our team at Guru has been struggling with and trying to get creative around, is like, what's worth a meeting, and what can be done differently, but that isn't, and not having the binary choice of like Zoom or Slack, right? And you're talking about this nice middle ground where it is a burst of quick communication that's a connection, but doesn't have to look like a meeting, and doesn't have to look like a text thread. So I would love to hear more about that sort of like burst of communication. What tends to happen in those, and how are they helping the team like both engage and stay productive?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best way to understand this is the analogy of the office. In a physical office, we have a wide variety of communication modes that we can use. Different ways to talk with each other. Like, I can wave at somebody, I can tap them on the shoulder, I can say like, hey, meet me in 2 minutes. I can pull in another person. We can go to a room and have like a focused meeting, or we can have like an open conversation, and people can join, can overhear us and join. And a lot of these modes just disappear when you have this dichotomy of Slack and Zoom and scheduled meetings. And what you lose is it's not just the personal connection, but you lose creativity, you lose ideas that could have gathered steam and been grown. You lose a whole bunch of different conversations types that maybe don't feel appropriate for a full meeting. And so with Tandem, you have these quick conversations. It's just one click to talk, and then you can pull in somebody else, and you can decide to see who else is talking and listen in, join in. Things become a lot more flexible. And also there's this sense of awareness. You see who else is talking. You're not wondering, you're not waiting on a link for somebody who may or may not be there. You have this awareness of your team, which is So it's hard to describe like the exact impact it has. It's just that when you don't have this awareness, you feel a little bit more blind and alone as to what's going on. So I
Yeah.
think just knowing who's around, who's available, who's free, who's busy, who wants to talk, like who's open to talking, who's focusing, who's heads down, this type of thing you get from an in-person office. And what we're finding is translating that to a virtual office is really, really powerful.
Yeah. No, I love what you're saying there, because I imagine that you're also with Tandem, you're avoiding FOMO, right? Which is like, people don't want to be in meetings all day, but then if they're not invited to a meeting, they worry like they're losing context. And
Yeah.
which is much, that's much more prevalent, I think, in a remote setting than.
Yeah.
And so now you just have many more choices that feel more natural to connect. Love that. That's such a great
There's
insight.
And on that point, there is one way in which remote meetings are just kind of better than in-person meetings, which is this aspect of being able to listen in. So we have, and I would really encourage this for a lot of companies. We have an open meeting policy where any meeting, unless it's a one-on-one, people can join as a listener. And the interesting thing about joining as a listener remotely is you can join for part of the meeting, and somebody in recruiting can listen to somebody in product and design talk through a feature so they know what's going on, and they can listen in for 15 minutes. Kind of people describe it as like it's like a podcast while you're at work. And then you can leave and go to get focus time for yourself or talk to somebody else. And it's not disruptive. Whereas in person, you can't just walk in 10 minutes late into a meeting and then walk out 7 minutes later without disrupting the whole meeting and people wondering, like, what does that mean? The friction is so much less online. And so that's something that has been just huge for us internally in terms of getting that transparency, getting more awareness, and less FOMO when it comes to meetings.
There's some really cool aspects of that. One, I think, is just the being able to join and like learn and listen and probably feel closer to other teams and have context. I also think you didn't necessarily mention it, but it struck me when you were describing that can also foster a really high trust culture. Because by having everything open and people have the choice and autonomy to join, I imagine that also just fosters a higher trust, right? Like nothing is nothing is like being kept secret, or some teams planning something that they don't want somebody else to know about. Like all of a sudden it just, it sort of assumes good intent from everybody. But it's interesting that you mentioned that. We haven't done that in all meetings, but we've been hosting, some of the leadership team where I work at Guru has been hosting office hours. And they've been some of the best conversations because they're more fluid, and there'll be people who join and they've been calling it lurking. I like the just listening and joining in podcasts.
Yeah.
But at first, I think people felt a little guilty. They're like, it's, I don't have any questions. I just wanted to come sort of hang out and listen to what other people's questions are. But I think if we all did more of that, right, those, again, back to the connections and the productivity would actually increase. I want to follow up on a point you made, though, and it's really an interesting one right now, which is like the balance between teamwork and collaboration, whether it's in meetings or these quick burst conversations, and then individual work and productivity and flow, and how I feel like oftentimes like product development engineering teams are very intentional about it and may have no meeting days, and just recognizing that the work that they do takes a lot of flow, individual focus time. But customer facing teams don't always have that choice of like not having meetings or blocking out work time. How have your teams balance individual work with teamwork, and maybe good insights from some of your customers too?
Yeah, I think that balance is really important. And I think that what we've seen internally and with our customers, and what the research shows, is it's you benefit from having both, but at different times. So you benefit from bursts of communication and then periods of focused independent work or deep work. And it looks different. Like the optimal balance looks different for every team, depending on what phase you're into. And so I think one thing that's really important for us is giving teams, especially the nuclear team, control over where they are in that balance. So when there are periods that just need a lot of coordination and a lot of transparency and communication and relationship building, you know, we're with Tandem, we have this way to have some of those conversations, quick meetings, pull other people into meetings, and have those bursts of coordination and communication. And then when there are periods of deep work, you know, there's do not disturb mode, there's focus time. It's really important to us that we work with how teams like to get focus time, whether it's on a daily basis, like these days don't have meetings, or an hourly basis, like, hey, for this afternoon, I'm going to go into focus time. And I think that's something that is a unique strength of remote work, like just being able to get that focus time, and also should get better and better as we help people control their own focus time.
Yeah, no, and you bring up some really important points, I think, that are like worth remembering, which is like being really intentional, right? And kind of communicating that intent of whether it is the idea of do not disturb, and just giving everyone on the team permission to explicitly say that, right? And that helps them communicate to their colleagues, actually, because sometimes people, like, if you don't put that out there, and then you're getting pinged and then you get annoyed, you know, like all that starts to build up sort of like the distrust or the annoyance. But this whole idea, we're going to be super intentional, or each one of us has agency around being really intentional of like what we need to be productive. And then how we foster the collaboration is we really share that, right? And we sort of intentionally communicate with one another.
Yeah, and it goes beyond your personal agency as well. It's we really, you know, one of our principles is just trust in teams, and we build around that. We're trying to build for maximum trust and transparency, especially in your core team. And so one of the things that we realize is that teams, like high functioning teams, have a lot of trust and built up social signals around when you interrupt somebody and when you respect their focus time. And in a physical office, you see this, you know, you can glance over at somebody and see that they have headphones on and they're listening to music. And you can glance over and, you know, just see that their screen's black, you know, they're in terminal, they're coding, like definitely don't bother them. And so one of the most powerful things that we've introduced with Tandem is we show your active work app, so work apps only, and user always has control, but we show the active work app to your teammates, and that creates these moments of just instant understanding. So like the magic moment for most people is they look over at somebody who's maybe an engineer and they see, oh, they're listening to music. I see the headphones on. We have a Spotify integration, so maybe you can tell what they're listening to. And I see them switching between terminal and VS Code. I know they're in deep focus. Like they don't have to say anything to me. I just know to respect their focus time. With my co-founder Bernat, who's a designer, you know, when I see him in Figma and he's listening to Taiko, like I know he's in deep focus. That is his deep focus soundtrack, and he doesn't have to block off his calendar. He doesn't have to go into do not disturb mode. He doesn't have to put up a sign that says don't bother me. Like I know he's in deep focus, and to respect that. And those are the kinds of kind of natural social cues that we want to recover from the physical office.
Yeah, I love that. And also by seeing when your colleagues are in deep focus mode, right? Like you're like, the best thing I can do for us and the team is leave you alone and not interrupt you right now. So that is really cool. And you highlighted something also there of like you're intentionally looking to help teams build high trust and high transparency. And I imagine that also, like, because that's the intent, the ability of even new teams learning to work together for the first time, like to be able to build trust faster, and not necessarily rely on prior relationships, like that to me is a fascinating opportunity, because it often just takes time, right, to build that trust. And high growth companies that are adding a lot of employees and a lot of people, those tend to sometimes be the stumbling blocks if you can't build that trust. And so the idea that like the best practices of high trust and transparency are like there for you is super, super exciting.
I'd love to know what you see, from your vantage point on, in terms of how companies are adapting their in-person practices to remote. And maybe for maybe for the viewers, you could go into your background and your current vantage point.
Sure. I have the privilege of working with a number of companies. So my day job's at a company called Guru, which is a knowledge management platform. And I also sit on the board of 3 kind of high growth SaaS companies. So Asana and Gusto and Patreon. And so, and I would say like what each of the companies is doing, I think is, in terms of like first principles, is what is important in our values and culture, even before we had to shift to remote. What are the things that make each company and each team unique, and how do we make sure we really continue to invest in that and foster that, and know that we have to do it differently, right, in this environment. And so I think each team is taking a different approach depending on their values and culture and what's important. So maybe I'll start with Asana. Even as like a collaborative work management platform, part of the culture that Asana really celebrates is in-person collaboration, and the balance between sort of in-person collaboration and letting people have focus time. And so being also a global company with many different offices, the leadership team and the employees really ultimately want to get back to being able to work together in person. And so the medium to long-term plan really is depending on the safety and health conditions in each location to have a really intentional plan of ultimately getting people back into offices. But in the meantime, giving people lots of flexibility and choice depending on their personal circumstances. So that's sort of one model in helping employees understand like where are we headed and what are the steps we're going to take. Gusto has had a home base model for the offices, which are all in the US, so San Francisco, Denver, and New York. And now they're exploring the opportunity of like, what would it look like if a 4th home base is actually all remote? And how would you invest in that the same way you do a physical location, right? With leadership that's dedicated to it, potentially a mix of all teams because they really believe in cross collaboration across all functions. But how might you design a 4th home base? So that's a fascinating exploration. And then Patreon, again, a totally different example where because so many of the employees are creators themselves, they've actually been quite enjoying the flexibility of working from home and collaborating with their colleagues and continuing to foster, their kind of creative pursuits. And so I think the team is taking an opportunity to reimagine like what should be done in person, especially based on what Patreon does. So like, would you create in-person locations where their creators and employees can come and put a concert on, right? Or record podcasts? Like, would the physical space be completely reimagined to be really unique? So I think they're taking some opportunity, seeing this as an opportunity to be creative and innovative and not just do offices, for the sake of offices. So hopefully that shares like a range of, I think, how companies are looking at it, but back to the first principles of like, who are we, what matters to us, and how does that manifest in how people work?
Yeah, that really maps to what we've seen in our customers, I think, in a couple of ways. I think one thing is the pull to come back to the office in some form, even if it's a few people, distributed offices, 1 or 2 days a week. Like the pull to come back to the office is real. And I think it's because it's not really the pull to come back to the office. It's the pull to like reconnect with the people that you work with. And, you know, especially if you've, you know, you're lucky enough to have a team that has really high trust, high safety, and you just really love the collaboration. I think that pull to the office is always going to be there. But I do think that there's starting to be this adaptation of how we think about the office. The office used to be many, many things. It used to be a bundle of different ways to connect and, you know, do work independently, together, meet, eat together. You know, it used to be a whole bunch of things. And now I think as we start to come back to the office, and as you know, a lot of the companies who are using Tandem have some sort of limited plan to start to come back to the office or open up offices. I think we're going to start to see a ton of hybrid teams, hybrid work, a lot more flexibility.
Yeah.
The balance is going to shift more towards more independent work. And maybe the office gets reimagined, which is what it sounds like Patreon is doing. Like the office gets reimagined into focusing on what makes offices great, on more of the creative space, on more of the shared gathering space. So I think that's going to be a really interesting transition. You know, we started to, you know, before COVID, we started to see this direction with some of the large companies that were starting to use Tandem, you know, even in the early days, who were not distributed or who were not remote companies. But at some scale, every company becomes remote. Every team has people who are working on different floors or different buildings or different offices, or traveling or working from home some part of the time. And so I think hybrid is our future.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, you said the pull back to the office, and I wonder if we should think about it as it's really the pull back to one another and your colleagues, right? It's
Yeah.
the pull back to the humans, less the physical space, which does allow us to be much more creative of what that space is. And does that space change locations? You know, like it's fun to think about how it might really evolve, and how it might give people more flexibility and more choice. So yeah, it's been fun to see, you know, people take the opportunity, for example, right now, because they can, to, you know, relocate for 3 months or 6 months and be closer to parents or siblings and still be very productive. And I think people aren't going to want to give that up, you know, once they've experienced it and see that they can have both the family connection and the work connection. So I'm excited for, you know, all of us being more creative about what that looks like. And that might be a good kind of final topic before we get into a lightning round, which is like, what else do you see based on what you're experimenting with at Tandem and your customers that are themes for the future of work, in addition to these like creative hybrid models?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things to watch is the rise of multiplayer apps, multiplayer collaboration apps. So one of the ways where we connect with each other at work is just doing work together, like getting into that state of collaborative flow where you're pairing on something. And one of the things that's been really exciting to see is each of the fundamental modes of doing work, spreadsheets, documents, code, you know, these are all design tools. Like they're all becoming multiplayer, you know, with companies like Figma or, you know, Replit with code. There are a whole bunch of companies making video editing, think multiplayer, like things that maybe we didn't envision becoming multiplayer because of technical reasons. Those technical challenges are being solved. There are companies like Room Service, which are building the platform and the infrastructure to take many other tools, like the next wave of tools, multiplayer. And you know, I think that's amazing, because what it lets you do is, you know, there's an analogy that we've made internally about you look at the younger generation playing games, playing multiplayer games online and making friends through this communication layer like Discord. And we see the same thing happening with distributed work, where people are building the relationships and coordinating communication through something like Tandem, but then also working together with these multiplayer apps, which are like, I guess, our equivalent of games.
Yeah, well, and I like that because it what it enables, right, is for work to be more like play, and which, you know, opens up people's ability to collaborate, to be creative, and for it to be like energy generating, right? Like
Yeah.
I love that vision because it really sort of says like back to even our theme of like people want to bring their full selves to work, and there's not really a separation so much anymore between work and play and life. And so the more that work, like what we do and how we create it, can feel like play, I think there's so many opportunities there, as well as I think opportunities for more inclusion.
Yeah, I mean, I think the shining example of this recently has, from my perspective, has been Figma. You know, we've seen a lot of teams do team building activities in Figma, whether it's like sharing photo albums of what's important to them, their families, and it's so interactive and so expressive that it can really be this, yeah, just a really delightful way to connect. You know, we took this one step further. My co-founder Bernat made a game in Figma called Figma Ninja that teaches people how to use Figma and how to use keyboard shortcuts. So you can actually create, and there's been an explosion of like board games in Figma. And so yeah, the you know, work and play are starting to get mixed, I think, in a really positive way.
I love that. All right. Well, people heard it here first. Figma Ninja. That's going to be, everyone's going to need to figure out how to get access to that and play that. That's awesome.
And shout out to Brienne with
oh, yeah,
the
Silicon
San
Valley. Yeah,
Francisco city
yeah,
built in Figma.
totally.
I had some of the most fun interactions there. It's like I randomly talked with the PM at Coda, and you know, we use Coda, and we had this great spontaneous interaction on
Oh,
Figma.
that is super fun. I love that. I know that was awesome when she built that. And I think that also, again, back to like, it invites people to be, you know, super imaginative and creative, but then also collaborate. You just, you know, you mentioned some really cool themes about the future of work, which is collaborating outside of our, like the walls of the company that you work with, and that a lot of co-creation is going to happen not in the like formal partnerships that, you know, happened before, but in these very serendipitous, like-minded companies and people kind of building together. So that feels like another, you know, theme in the future of work and how people expect to work. All right, so we're gonna end this with some lightning round questions, if y'all allow me. What is your favorite app right now besides Tandem?
Besides Tandem, I have to say Cocoon. So Cocoon is, it's a mobile app. It's a beautiful mobile app. It's a digital space for your close friends and family, built by an ex-Facebook PM and designer. And they've taken the opposite approach of messaging apps. It's really just about your like small groups. And my family is like so many people's families, like pretty spread across the world right now. And it's not clear when we'll see each other again. And so it's been really nice to have that digital space, and also to see it evolve, because they're doing some really cool things.
Yeah, and the you highlight something super important, is just like beautiful design. I think we all like both crave that and value that now, right? Apps that, you know, that recognize our humanity, and you know, and it feels like, oh, someone gets me. So love that. Okay, I'm gonna need to introduce that to my family as well. How do you avoid Zoom fatigue? So, you know, as much as we've talked about like mixing up communication, you know, methods, and all of that, and having choice in communication, I think a lot of us still spend a good chunk of time on Zoom. And so what are some things you and your team are doing to kind of avoid or battle Zoom fatigue?
Yeah, I think um, audio is powerful. So with Tandem, like calls start on audio and then go to video. And kind of looking at the data, half of the calls that all of our users do just stay as audio. And so I think that can be really powerful, especially when you're talking with your team or you're doing work together. You're often working on a document or working on code or screen sharing, and doing that with small video or just audio, it's metaphorically more like you're sitting side by side looking at the same thing rather than sitting across from each other, which is a really like high energy communication format. So also like going for walks, doing one-on-ones, walking one-on-ones, just with audio can be really nice as well. But I think also mixing up the format of communication and trying not to overbook ourselves.
Yeah. Oh, I like that a lot. The audio, to your point, like you almost pay more attention, right, when you're just listening, and then the ability to, because people aren't, doing the one-on-one walks together around the block, you can still do that separately and like listen to each other. And I think you can often get more out of it and have a deeper conversation when you don't feel like, okay, I've just got to focus on the screen. So that is great.
Yeah. In person, when you think about what a meeting looks like in a room, you actually move through many different modes. Sometimes you turn to face the person and it's really about that interpersonal, like that relationship. And then sometimes, you're looking at a document or you're looking at your laptop and they're looking at their laptop and you're thinking together about a problem. And then sometimes, you're going for a walk and thinking about something else, and you don't need that intense like visual engagement. And I think those are all things that you can replicate online. I mean, we've made those transitions pretty seamless in Tandem, like video, audio, like small video. But regardless of what tool you're using, I think that experimenting with the format, like not doing every one-on-one as a full screen Zoom video, but experimenting with the format really helps with that fatigue.
Yeah, that's and there's something that comes out in what you're sharing too, is introducing variety, right? And right now I think across so many things, including work, like people are craving variety because so many things that used to make, the mix of whatever we did in our day, we can't do yet. And so so even with work, like knowing that you have choices beyond like Zoom and Slack to like communicate and connect, and adding back variety, I think could be so powerful for people just to sort of stay engaged and motivated and creative. Well, and then the last question I have for you is an important one. So how do you take care of yourself as CEO and founder? Because like during these times and in all the conversations I have with founders, CEOs, so much is on your shoulders, right? The team is having ups and downs. Individuals are having ups and downs, but they all look to you to kind of keep the motivation up, to share the vision, to be positive. So what are some things you do to take care of yourself and make sure you're recharging?
It's an important question, and I don't know if I'm the best to speak about this. Right now we're in a phase where it's the need for Tandem to get better, and the pull from our users is so strong. It's very motivating in like a good way to just pour a lot of energy and creativity into this product that we're building. I think for me personally, making sure I have some alternate creative pursuits. I think like a lot of people, I've started playing more music. I used to play the piano. My brother's a pianist, and so having that more personal time has been really nice. And then also getting outdoors. I've been surfing more in quarantine, and that's a really nice escape. So just trying to find things that make time for yourself is really important.
That is great. Any favorite surfing beaches?
Ocean Beach.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I'm glad that you're taking the time for yourself, because I do think the pressures, you know, on leaders and especially CEO and founders is it's always, you know, great, especially in startup high growth phase. But there's an additional element right now that everyone's leading through, you know, with uncertainty, with all the challenges of the pandemic, and with, you know, remote or new muscles that everyone's building quickly. So important that leaders take time for themselves and recharge, since so many people are depending on them. So I'm glad that you are playing piano. You'll have to have a room in Tandem to share some of your music, and then love hearing that you're out surfing. So thank you so much for this conversation. It's been so fun to get to know you and talk to you about all these topics. And I know we could go on forever, but this was great to be able to spend time together.
Thanks, Anne. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for that enlightening conversation. We appreciate Anne and Rajiv for sharing their insight. And thank you for sharing your day with us. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to Worklife's YouTube channel for more digital events. We'll catch you later.